Knibb, the producer.
All right. Welcome, everyone, to this edition of the Transportation Team's Talks at Google. Today, we will be talking to Neal Henderson, a sports scientist at Wahoo Fitness. My name is Dan Smedley. I'm a transportation program manager at Google, and I'm in charge of the bike programs, amongst other things. So today, we will be doing about 30 minutes between Neal and myself doing a Q&A. And then we're going to get into some audience questions. So you see on the screen right now that you can go to slido.com, enter the code 66116, and ask those questions. The more questions, the merrier, and the better show we'll have with your questions as opposed to mine, probably. So please get those questions in as soon as possible. So let's welcome Neal into the show and get going. Hey, Neal, how's it going?
I'm doing well, Dan. Thanks for having me.
Hey, no problem. Hey, you're calling in from Boulder, right?
Yes, Boulder, Colorado here. It's winter, but some days it's not too cold. Today, a little bit cool, though.
All right. Well, thanks for joining us. And, first I'd like to get a little bit into your background and, maybe you can tell us how you got into endurance sports to begin with.
Yeah, I started off like most kids doing a lot of different sports, a lot of different activities. Some of the standard things when I first began, like playing baseball and playing soccer, for those of you who are Europeans, football, and swimming, and did a whole mix of things. And I really got interested in the sports science side of things by introduction to some information from a high school coach that I had in swimming. And she had a master's degree in exercise physiology. Her husband was a postdoc in exercise physiology. And she gave us some information about tapering and why we were doing less leading into one of our bigger competitions. And I was really interested in the kind of why we were training the way we were and why we were doing less volume and changing our rest ratios compared to what we were doing. And that kind of really got me inspired to learn more about sports science. And as a kid, I had an opportunity to tour the United States Olympic Training Center in Colorado Springs. I did a big, long 2-week trip around the U.S. with my parents and my younger sister in our Volkswagen van, visiting all kinds of places. But that Colorado Springs visit was amazing. Got to see the facility and actually go in and meet some of the folks who were working in the sports science department there and see really behind the scenes how they were working with some of the best athletes that we had in our country to be preparing for the Olympic Games and World Championships. And that's when I decided, like, this is the kind of work I want to do. And so that was kind of pushing me that direction.
Yeah, very nice. So you've done some coaching in your time as well, right?
Yes, definitely. I started off as a swim coach with actually that same team where the coach that kind of inspired me during after my freshman summer at Penn State, where I was studying exercise and sports science, and continued down that path quite a bit. I volunteered with first national teams for triathlon in 1996, which triathlon didn't enter the Olympic program until the year 2000. Right. So when everyone was in Atlanta for the Olympic Games, I went out to Colorado Springs and helped out for a couple of weeks, volunteering with that first national team and learning a bit about really that training at the highest level. And then I came to graduate school here in CU Boulder in 1997, and I've never left Boulder since then. Well, I travel a bit, but always come back.
And do I have it right that you at one time coached Taylor Phinney?
Yes, I coached Taylor Phinney, who, if you don't know who Taylor Phinney is, his mom is Connie Carpenter Phinney, 1984 Olympic gold medalist in the road race, first women's road race. She was also world champion on the track. She actually did a lot of other things. She was an Olympian in speed skating at age 14, if you don't know that as well. And Taylor's father, Davis Phinney, has the most professional victories of any American cyclist. He won 2 stages of the Tour de France and won a bronze medal in the 1984 Olympic Games in the team time trial. And I met Taylor, as a youngster, because I had done some work with Connie and Davis with some of the camps and things like that that they used to run, training camps for cycling and teaching people how to ride bikes. But Taylor started racing as a 15-year-old, and I started coaching him basically that first summer that he was racing. And he was at the Olympic Games in the individual pursuit on the track at age 18. So a very short, rapid rise. He had all the right genes.
Well, yeah, that I was going to lead into that question. I mean, I have no doubt that you're an awesome coach, but you look at somebody like that with his pedigree, his genes. How much was it the genes, and how much was it, just coaching and everything else?
There's an absolute genetic component. We often say, if you want to go to the Olympics, choose your parents well. Doesn't mean your parents like his, that they have to have gone to the Olympics, but it's a nice setup for you. The other thing that's really interesting there with Taylor is also like what his family and friends did. They they earned Olympic medals. Like, they were world champions. There were people who won stages of the Tour de France, of the Giro d'Italia. And so it's just kind of like everyone does it kind of thing in what Taylor's, exposure was. So from a mental perspective as well, it's just like, oh, that's what people do. He wasn't like maybe me or you, who didn't grow up with what Olympians and world champions surrounding us, who see that and say, like, that level is up here and I'm here, and maybe if I get lucky I could get there. He was kind of like, yeah, I'm here, and I can beat my dad here and there, and so I can do that. So it's a good starting point, I would say, but had all the support as well, and the commitment and drive, and it takes all of those things in combination.
Yeah, that's awesome. So look, let's start out on kind of a basic level. So maybe for someone who's just getting into cycling or fitness, and they're starting out, and maybe they're thinking, well, what's 30 minutes of cycling going to do for me? It won't be that useful. What do you say to that person?
Yeah. So, I mean, big picture, humans are meant to move to some degree. When we don't move, we become less well. We become unhealthy. And so it is important to be moving in some way. And so even though it may not seem like a big challenge to go and do a 30-minute walk or a 30-minute ride, that is actually a really positive step. And if you can do that several days a week, you're definitely going to be making some significant gains just in general health and well-being. And that alone is a big step. I know, within our country, within the US, we definitely have too many folks that are inactive, that do not even do that basic level of activity several days a week. So going and doing that 30-minute ride, whether it's riding, to the office or to and from the office, or going and doing something with family, with friends, getting out and doing it as more of a recreational thing. In any case, something is better than nothing. So getting started, absolutely. Get moving and stay consistent with that as a first and foremost of importance for health overall.
Yeah. Hey, and thanks for that plug. Did you hear Neal? He said, get on that bike and ride your bike to work when you're going. That's certainly something for the transportation team is certainly interested in. So thanks for that. I didn't even have to prompt you, huh, Neal?
Yeah, it's one of the reasons I moved to Boulder, Colorado here. They have a phenomenal network of paths and lanes, and the bicycle just for transportation is a tool. It's also, definitely a competitive and recreational side of things. But for me, just getting around by bike is awesome. One of those things that can, two birds, one stone.
Yeah, awesome. So let's talk a little bit more about beginners. So maybe talk about some of the biggest mistakes that people make. They're just getting into fitness, they're feeling good, they're loving it, then something bad happens. What are some of the mistakes that people make?
Yeah, so there's a couple things. So the most common thing we see is a lack of consistency over time. So the most important thing is establishing some level of habit that you can do and follow through with and do consistently. If you have that going, that takes care of a lot of it. Even for a really highly trained athlete, the same kind of thing goes, that consistency in doing some training with consistency is important. The biggest mistake we see when people are committed and say they do have that habit established and they're consistently doing things is they do some of their training consistently too hard. And I know it sounds counterintuitive that if you want to be fast, you have to go hard. There is a time and place for that. Absolutely, yes. There's no free lunch. You have to do the work to be able to get better. But the actual vast majority of your training should be done at a relatively easy effort. And a good way to check that without even using any of these, kind of fancy tools that maybe are giving you GPS coordinates and heart rate and speed and cadence and all those things is just a talk test. If you can't actually talk out loud in a sentence together to talk to somebody out loud, you're going harder than what would be considered kind of an aerobic endurance effort level. And so that is a big mistake. When you see an elite athlete, like, great runner, they can be running at a 5-minute mile pace and talk, right? Like that's
right.
a different level. Like they have an incredible output. And in cycling, we can say, you might have a professional who can ride at 20 miles an hour and literally be talking, eating food, and having no problem. They could do that literally all day and night if they chose. So keeping that relative effort at that same intensity, so where you can talk, might mean, I might be running a 10-minute mile and somebody else might be riding a bike, 8 miles an hour at that same aerobic intensity, but keep that as a way of checking and make sure you're going easy on, again, a majority of your training sessions.
I do want to drill into that. But first, you mentioned something about developing habits, and especially at this time of year, coming off of the New Year's resolutions, maybe some of those goals have faded. What are some tips and tricks that people can use to establish that habit for fitness and stick with it?
Yeah. So one of those things is trying to tie it together in what works in your life. So like if you create a goal or habit that just is so far beyond where your current level is and is unsustainable, you might have that motivation and drive for a few weeks, but then reality kicks in and you peter off. And so having it work where with your family, with job, with all of those things, you can fit this in and make it work is really the key. So like I've had, again, we'll use a bike commuting example. I've had some folks that work, let's say down in Denver and they live here in Boulder, and that's a fairly long commute, both by car or by bike. But by bike, let's just say it might take them an hour or so to get from one place to another. And so that's not something realistically day in and day out that they can ride in, do a full day of work and ride home. That's just too much. So in some cases, it's you drive in day one, you leave your car there, but you have your bike with you and you ride home. And then the next morning you get up just that little bit early, you ride into work. And then that second day you drive home. And so you split it out a little bit in a way like that is sustainable. For me, sometimes like my family will go up to like Estes Park and on a weekend to go for a hike, and I'll leave ahead of them a few hours and I'll just say, okay, my wife will drive up with the kids and the dogs and I'll get my 3-hour ride in to get up there, and we go out and do a hike and then have brunch after or something like that. And it makes it fit in life. So I still get to do that bigger ride that I wanted to do on the weekend, but I didn't take away from that family time. That's also really important.
So it sounds, it's like planning component, right? It's like you were saying, you're planning ahead, right?
Yeah, and be creative with it too. Again, like a training schedule, in some cases it'll say like ride this amount of time, run this distance. And it's like, okay, well, there's a lot of different ways you can do that run. Again, like you could run to a place. Like it doesn't just mean like run that distance means has to start at home and end at home or whatever. Ride, same thing. It doesn't mean start at home, end at home. It's ride that amount of time or distance and figure it out and actually have fun with it.
I like the way you think. I incorporate that. Yeah, I incorporate that kind of stuff into my training routine as well. So let's talk a little bit about the current situation with the global pandemic. We know that walking, running, and cycling are all up, but let's talk a little bit more specific about the indoor cycling side of things. Wahoo Fitness is known for bike trainers, particularly amongst other things, but what's happening on the indoor cycling trends?
Yeah, we're absolutely seeing massive growth. And so, such that even the supply chain, cannot keep up with the demand, both for trainers and for computers and all the auxiliary, things that we have at Wahoo that we produce. Our utilization of the software that we use, our training app is called the Sufferfest, has absolutely skyrocketed over the past year. And all of those things I don't see, again, just like going away. Let's just say we get into a kind of a post-pandemic situation. All of those things don't just go away, and there are a lot more people riding bikes. And again, still, just getting a bike is tough these days, and getting one, in stock, the one that you want, the size, et cetera. Right. So there's absolutely massive growth, and this is definitely a positive thing. But I do believe it is also a sustainable thing that can continue on as we move into that next phase of things as more vaccines are distributed and we start to see infection rates decline and all of those things. So,
well, I'm glad you mentioned the Sufferfest, which is a Wahoo based app. So we know of other ones like Zwift or Ruvi or Trainer Road. There's a lot of these different platforms that people can use. How can people incorporate those platforms into their indoor cycling or training to be effective?
Yeah, a big part of what the indoor training options provide is that ability to have some specificity, purpose, and progression into what you do in training. And so an indoor ride is definitely a lot more like kind of time efficient than it would be to ride outdoors for the same time. Because if you think about it, on a stationary bike or indoor bike on a trainer, you're not going to coast at all. If so, that's kind of a waste of time. You're just sitting there doing nothing. So outdoors in the real world, like, you're going to have some uphills, downhills, stop signs, red lights, things like that, where you actually just do stop and coast and don't do as much work. So for a given amount of time, you do get a little bit more work done on that indoor environment. You can also be just very, very specific in the training and work that you do. So in some cases, if you think of like a Zwift, you have that group ride component where, you're with others, and it's just kind of, you're at the whim of what's going on. Other times you may like pull up a workout or ride a certain course to be able to try to do a specific effort. We definitely do a lot more of that within our software. It's really, each of those workouts have a lot more of that specificity and purpose and targeting your effort relative to your actual ability. And so those are some of the things that you look for when you're training inside, is having training that is specific to what your goals are and what your current ability is. So there's, different ways of assessing that, but having a purpose to your session, being able to do that gives you, again, some of that positive feedback. And, you can look at some of the, analytics or information that you get from that to give you sometimes that like self pat on the back or that motivation to, okay, next time I want to do a little bit better, and keep a positive motivation going in that way as well.
So let's drill down into that a little bit for maybe people that aren't familiar as much with the smart trainer technology and things like Sufferfest. So you mentioned like you have a very specific training routine that can be done through the app. Now, how do people know what speed to go or what, power to push or any of these other things? How does that work?
Yeah, so there's a few things. So again, each software has its different kind of strengths and how they lay things out within our app. I'll just use that as an example, since it's what I'm fairly familiar with. Is we actually have free training plans that kind of are across a spectrum of different types of efforts or activities. So if you're getting ready for like a metric century, which would be 100 kilometers or 62 miles, or getting ready for a triathlon, or getting ready for a mountain bike race, or just a general fitness, we have plans in all of those ways. And our workouts are designed by myself and several other coaches who work with me that have this kind of progression over time. So from, basically workout to workout over the course of weeks, we build up training. And then we also have rest incorporated in that, because work without rest will not actually help you get as fast as you can be. So you have to have that counterbalance of rest. So a training schedule or training plan, when you look at them, make sure that you have this kind of periodic rest where things back off a little bit. So it's usually like kind of you build for 2 or 3 weeks, back off for a week, build for 2 or 3 weeks, back off, but you're on this net trend of building that fitness and amount of work that you can do. Within, say, what we do with the Sufferfest that might be different than like Zwift is we also have strength training and yoga sessions that are part of that. You can choose if you want to include those things into your training plan, and it's just kind of baked in. Then when you pull up your calendar, it'll show you what workout you have for the day or workouts. So, it might be a 30-minute easy recovery spin, which is a purpose and a kind of a ride that you might do, and it's going to be very low intensity. And there might be a 10 or 15-minute yoga session after to work on increasing mobility or flexibility in a certain area, or just an overall yoga session like that. And so having, again, those purpose-built progressions and having a reason for what you're doing and building up like that is important. If you use an app where it's just like you jump in and do a workout, you'd want to think about maybe having some sort of purpose. Maybe it's like once a week you do a harder day, and maybe you jump on Zwift and do like a group ride, or do even, they have racing that you can kind of do these races, in that format. knowing where your current fitness level is at is what's most important for
Right.
when you do that kind of progression. And so there are some tests out there, different things that we can use to assess like what is sustainable for you as a power output. If you have a smart trainer, that'll be one of those one of those data fields or input or output data that you would see from that. You could also just use heart rate and perceived effort are other ways of assessing how hard you're working. And heart rate is a very individual thing. There's, everyone probably has heard of a lot of those age-based formulas, 220 minus your age or 210 is minus half your age. Those are estimates. It's kind of like
Right.
shoe size. Bell-shaped curve of humanity, a size 9 fits a lot of people, but there's a lot of people that's too big of a shoe and a lot of people that's much too small of a shoe, and they're perfectly normal people. The foot size is different. And just like that heart rate, that formula has a very broad range. And so we often use testing to assess really what that individual point is, kind of a peak heart rate and a sustainable heart rate, or what we often call a threshold heart rate, as well as then like a sustainable power, threshold power. We can get into the weeds and get into all the technical stuff, functional threshold power and all those things, but that's we're going deeper into things.
We might have some time to do that, which I wouldn't mind. But you're talking about tracking metrics, and Google recently acquired Fitbit. And I'm interested to get your take on wearables and how people can use these types of products to track their fitness. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, definitely. I see value. You'll see I got 2 things on my wrist here, different measurements. And in a way, we're thinking about not just the training of the work that you do, but how your body is responding and how you're recovering from that. And so some of the 24/7 type metrics that you can look at then include like a resting heart rate, which is, again, one of those things as you rest and you sleep and when you wake up, like what's happening with resting heart rate does give some indication and changes in basically cardiovascular fitness and especially really that stroke volume of the heart. So how much blood the heart pumps every beat. As your heart, which is a muscle, gets stronger with endurance training, it can push more blood for every beat. And that's that stroke volume that goes up. The amount of blood that you need just at rest and oxygen just sitting around doesn't change. And so the demand is kind of stable, whether you're more fit or a little bit less fit, but the heart pushing more blood every beat means the resting rate that the heart beats can be decreasing to get that same amount of blood presented to the muscles and to the brain, et cetera. So resting heart rate, as we see fitness level increase, we see a little bit of a trend and drop in heart rate over time. We can also see like when somebody's getting sick or when they're overtraining, not resting enough, we tend to see a trend in an increase in resting heart rate. And if somebody really just keeps pushing that red line of effort, not resting, not recovering well for too long, we'll see a big drop off in that resting heart rate. And that's then actually a bad thing when you see that shift in that direction. And there's some ties to what we would call heart rate variability, which is the basically the variation from beat to beat in the heart rate, which is something that changes again with fitness level as well as with stress, anxiety, and some of these other factors. So those are other elements that we're starting to get in much greater detail and resolution with some of the wearables that we have right now.
I'm glad you brought up heart rate variability. I wanted to ask you. See, I have the soapbox now, so I'll ask you a question for myself. I've been tracking heart rate variability over the last couple of months, and I'm not sure that I've gleaned so much from it. I have an example that I want to give, but first I want to hear from you. Is this something that people should be tracking? What should we be looking for if we're tracking heart rate variability?
Yeah, so HRV has actually been around for a while. I actually have a PhD dissertation that's over 20 years old that I'm rereading through a lot of these studies that were done now 25 plus years ago. And so heart rate variability, the thing that we think of now is like we have, again, different wearables that are giving us a continuous measurement of that. Some of the best research in utilizing HRV is done where somebody is in the morning doing a resting 3-minute laying down protocol, just measuring that resting heart rate and HRV lying down and then standing up immediately and staying standing then for 2 to 3 minutes, and seeing the changes in that HRV from basically that prone laying down position to the standing position. And that's where actually some of the best use case where HRV variability, the heart rate variability, has been tied to some of the things that we see with heavy training load or adaptations to training and improvements in performance. Most of us are not going to dedicate a 5-minute period of absolutely laying down still and then standing up and doing nothing to get the kind of resolution that data provides. And so right now, so much of the work really being done is, okay, well, what if we just look at HRV during sleep? Well, you have to then consider sleep cycles, and there is a periodicity to what's going on as we sleep. HRV is just not static all the way through. There's changes. So then you have to increase the amount of time that you sample that. And then do you just take the absolute average? Are you using some other thing? So really what data is being put into, what algorithms are really a big part of that. Is it useful or not? Not to mention, there's actually some interesting data then on the actual device itself and really the electronics involved, and is it actually effectively measuring what it purports to measure in that HRV. So there's a whole nother thing. So we can go through a list of 5, 6 different devices out there on the market right now, and some of them are better than others, but all of those pieces in combination kind of make it I'm not sold in its current application for just daily use in saying that HRV will absolutely be the answer to telling you when you should go easier or when you should go harder, which is right now what some people are trying to do. They're jumping the gun, I would say. It's kind of like sleep. So if you use something that does track sleep in some cases, I think about it as, I may have some objective that like assessed my movement, resting heart rate, and some of these things, but what's my quality of sleep? I'm the judge of that. That's a subjective. So the machine can't tell me, or the device can't tell me how I felt. I have to tell potentially a software interface in between that. It may associate then over time and have, some sort of a learning algorithm there that goes on, and it is an individual response. And that's where it's exciting for me, but then being able to scale that individual variability to then those trends, that I think is the real key as we move forward, the exciting stuff.
Wow, we could probably talk about that one topic for quite some time, right? I know it's
definitely a few beers or water.
Yeah, exactly. I'll meet you after the show. So let's talk about something that's probably near and dear to a lot of people listening in. So, quite a few of us work a lot. We have a lot of family commitments. So what would you tell the time-starved athlete about how to maximize their time and fitness in any given training week or session?
Definitely. So there's a couple things here. So we can make a few assumptions, but let's just say if you can have up to about an hour a day, several days a week, whether that's 4 or 5 days a week that you can set aside for activity, that is definitely better than like kind of the feast and famine of doing a lot and then just doing absolutely nothing for a week or 2 weeks, doing a lot or too much and then not being able to do anything for a while. So having that bit of consistency, super important, like we talked about a while ago. With that, then if you have 2 days where you do a little bit more of a specific kind of higher intensity type of effort, and high intensity, I'd say like the lowest end of high intensity is around this threshold value, this threshold point, which is kind of where like you're working hard. If you think of a 1 to 10 scale, 1 being like, I'm standing here, I'm really not doing anything, 2 maybe being just walking or jogging easy at a 3, and like a 7 out of 10 is like usually around where that threshold is, which would feel hard, but could be sustained for maybe say about 30 minutes or an hour if you were really going to push yourself for that full hour. You might want to do 1 day where you work around like a 6 or 7 for 20 or 30 minutes, and you can break that up into bits and pieces, 2 or 3 minutes at a time, or do some longer 5, 6, 7, 8 minute segments and just accumulate about 30 minutes of that. once a week, and then 1 day a week where you go even above that like threshold level and do short efforts. They might be 30 seconds or a minute. And you do those with about equal rest. We can simplify. I've got all kinds of more specific workouts than that, but just keeping it simple, a 1-to-1 ratio, working hard, going easy, do several repeats like that. So you can get a few minutes total of that higher intensity activity is definitely good from the cardiovascular point standpoint or view of things. Like 2 days like that, having 2 days that then are easier. One of them could just be really a short, easy walk, spin, whatever, 20-30 minutes. And then 1 day where you go a little bit longer than what's kind of normal or comfortable for you. Maybe that's an hour or an hour and a half, but still stay in that kind of steady state aerobic zone where you can talk. Do not forget to do some sort of strength training. So endurance training is good, but it's not the only thing. So there is still some level of strength training that is helpful and important, especially as we age. We start to lose a little bit of our fast twitch muscle fibers, and we have to do work to maintain that. And it doesn't mean you have to go to the gym and be using heavy weights. You can do some things at home. You can do body weight exercises. All the things that we actually have in our app are all body weight exercises for the most part. Like if you want to use, a water bottle with water, you can get a little out of resistance, but you don't have to have a full gym to be able to do some specific things, especially if you break it down into like one single-legged activities, like a single-legged squat and things like that. You can get the same kind of effect.
I was hoping you weren't going to say that, because now I feel guilty for not doing my strength training now that the gym is closed, right?
The biggest reason why we do that is not just to maintain the quality of muscle, because as we age, again, we lose those fast twitch fibers, and that's going to actually help us maintain balance as we get much older. Very important. But even more important than that is keeping that structural integrity is going to be increasing the tendon's capability of tolerating that endurance work and not getting injury. So if you've ever had a tendonitis, that's an inflammation of the tendon. That is typically the muscle has done more than what the tendon could tolerate. When you do strength training, you're not just changing the muscle itself, you're actually changing the connective tissue's strength and capacity too. So you improve that connective tissue's ability to tolerate stress. So it has a benefit for you as an endurance athlete that goes beyond, just like, the muscly thing, but it's actually the connective tissue and staying healthy and injury free.
No doubt. Thanks for the reminder. Got to get out there and do more push-ups and squats, right?
Once or twice a week, just consistently get it in.
But I want to get back into this kind of hour concept for the time-starved athlete, because it was interesting. You talked about maybe doing 2 workouts during the week with that higher intensity. So let's say I'm going out for a 60-minute ride. Let's talk about cycling today. And I want to maximize my time. I want to incorporate some intervals. So maybe walk me through what that 60 minutes looks like in terms of warm up, intervals, all that other stuff.
Exactly. So composition of that workout is you always want to have a little bit of a transition from where you are at rest when you're starting your workout to be slowly increasing that intensity over the first, typically at minimum 5 minutes, but realistically most about 10 to 15 minutes. And the first 5 minutes of that could be very easy, gentle, kind of a little bit of an increase in your speed or intensity. And then in some cases, we'll do like little primer efforts, 30 seconds to a minute, where it's a little bit of an acceleration of effort. So like you pedal just a little bit faster, but not really hard, and take a minute easy and do a couple of those just to kind of get ready for then what you're going to do in that the more specific block. And so if we use, say, those short effort example, maybe it's going to be 10 times 10 repeats of 1 minute hard at around, say, threshold, or maybe even slightly over. So think of like a 7 or 8 out of 10 effort with 1 minute, just very easy in between. So you go into an easier gear, you recover, and don't worry how slow and how easy you go in recovery. There is no like lower limit that you have to maintain. It's as low and slow as you can go. So you try to maximize the work that you can do in the on periods, in those 1 minutes on. And if you find like you've done 5 and you're like, I can't keep doing this, increase the rest a little bit. Say maybe go 90 seconds of rest, still try to do that minute. If you find at that minute, like you can hold the pace for like the first 40 seconds and then you start to fade off, okay, just make it a little bit shorter, and for a given session, try to do 45 seconds rather than suffer through that last 15 or 20 seconds and really slow off, because you don't want to be training to go slower while working harder. So I always think about trying to maintain the output. So if we have a power meter, well, that gives us that kind of instantaneous feedback of the actual, basically force that we're putting into the pedal and the cadence. But running the same thing, it would be like your pace or speed. So if you slow down in your pace while you're doing those kind of efforts at the end, shorten them up a little bit, or slow down your starting pace so you can maintain that effort all the way through. But if you did those 10, 1 minute on, 1 minute off, that's 20 minutes. You had a 15-minute warm up, you have 30 minutes, 35 minutes there. So just kind of general endurance, just on that steady state for another 15 or 20 minutes, and then a couple minutes transition to cool down. That hour is done.
There's your hour.
And it's effective and specific, and it'll help you get better.
Awesome. I'm going to ask one more question, and we're going to get into some audience questions. Remember, you can go to slido.com. There it is on the screen, and enter the code 66116 and ask your question. So one final point on that hour workout, with some intervals in there. Should we be taking some water or some sports drink along with us? What kind of hydration or fueling do you need for that type of workout?
Yep. So training, when we exercise, basically increases our energy expenditure. It increases heat production. So here's a cool thing. In cycling, we're only about 20 to 25% efficient at converting the work into the pedals. So if you measured 200 watts at your pedal that you're pushing as you're going along, you're actually creating 400 to 800 calories or watts worth of heat production. So that's why if you've ever ridden a stationary bike without a fan and a wall, you'll overheat pretty quickly. Right. So that converting, basically food energy into that output energy is part of this. So fueling and hydration are definitely part of this. When we go for a short effort, typically under an hour, and keep the intensity pretty low in that talk test type effort, pretty much just plain water is going to be plenty for you. You don't really need to do anything more than that. If you're going into that hour, but you're doing a little bit more intensity, you might have a sports drink, especially if you're outside and it's hotter, and you're sweating a fair amount because you're doing work, and so having a little bit of that carbohydrate can actually help you keep those energy levels up and keep your output over the entire session. You don't need like a power bar, and you definitely actually don't want to eat a power bar or energy food like that, like right at the start of an effort or right in the middle of a hard workout. It's something like a sports drink is probably the easiest, simplest thing like that. When we go into that extreme of longer and sustained intensity and multiple hour type of workouts, then we do have to have a little bit more intake. And there's for sure a size dependency of how much somebody needs to bring in, take in per hour. And how long they're going. But, for most folks, around 200 to 300 calories an hour is about right. If you're using a sports drink, that's about a 6 to 8% solution of carbohydrate, and also having sodium in there. So some of the electrolytes, but sodium being the most important. If you think of the amount of sodium, it should be around 500 to 800 milligrams per liter of fluid. You can do some math and look on the label and see what's in there. And as you mix it, you might have to convert from ounces to liters and things like that. There's 33.6, I believe, ounces per liter. But doing some of that math just to make sure you're keeping things up there. At the extreme, we have individuals during like an Ironman race that are eating, big, really strong professionals that are eating 500, 600 calories predominantly of carbohydrate every hour and drinking 1.5 liters of fluid every hour to maintain what those needs are to stay both cool, fueled, and hydrated. Pretty wild.
Yeah, awesome. So I'm going to be looking over here because I have the Slido question up. So we're going to cut over to some of the audience questions. So let's go. David asks, with so many different sensors and types of data being collected, and we've gotten into some of that, which ones are the most useful in terms of providing actionable feedback? And he has heart rate, power, cadence, sleep. So he gave you a few in there. So there's a lot of stuff out there. So we're going to pin you down, Neal.
Yeah, I honestly come back to a triangulating what's going on. And if you really want to have some measure of what you're actually doing. And so power output in cycling is really the best measure. If you're running, your pace that you're running, the speed that you're running is that net output, or swimming, same kind of thing. It's a pace, your output. I then like to look at strain physiologically, what's happening with heart rate being the simplest, easiest tool that, we can have, whether it's an arm one, a wrist one, or around the chest, any of those where we have then an assessment of that cardiovascular strain. So we have output, strain, and then over here is what's going on between the ears, your effort, that load of stress or strain. We often call that RPE, or rating of perceived exertion. That 1 to 10 scale is a very good one. There's other scales out there. The original kind of RPE scale was a 6 to 20, which was, if you add a 0 to the number, would be associated with approximately a maximum heart rate. It's not perfect, but the 1 to 10 scale I find to be a little bit better. And that categoric one is a little bit more related to what we consider a lactate curve, with the intensity and stress on the system. So for me, looking at those three things in combination as you train, when you get fitter, an easy run isn't changing. It's still a 2 out of 10 or a 3 out of 10 effort. The difference in the heart rate should stay in that same, let's just say for me, that's a heart rate of 120 to 130. When I'm less fit, I'm only pushing 120 watts. And when I'm more fit, I'm pushing 180 watts. Or running, I might, at that same easy effort, when I'm not as fit, go a 9-minute mile. And when I'm more fit, I'm going at an 8-minute mile. And that's really that triangulation. And when you see on a given day, if your heart rate's really high for a given effort, it's potentially an indication that you might not want to do anything really intense that day. Or if your perceived effort's really high and your heart rate's really low, same thing. That's a discordance between that normal relationship. That's really the best use. And so I would say a bit of all of those tools.
And that's where you feel flat, right? That's that flat feeling.
Yeah. Yeah. And too much of that, it just slows you down and you actually don't get better. So like a lot of times I look at training patterns for athletes over time, and it just looks like a sine wave. They do a lot of work and then they get so tired and they're not going fast, or they do less, and there's no net progression. They're just a flat line across time. Like their pace, their 10K, let's just say they've run 50 minutes for the past, 4 times they've done it within 30 seconds or so, because they haven't created a stimulus for appropriate change. And in most cases, it's they actually didn't rest enough relative to the work they were doing to be able to get that bump. It takes sometimes that rest. Well, always it takes the rest to actually benefit from the work that you've done.
Awesome. Let's get into another one. A different David this time asks, what's the number one thing time crunched amateurs are doing wrong with respect to getting the most training effect from precious little training time? So biggest mistake.
Yeah. I'd say that I'll give you 3 things. Number one is saying I don't have much time, so every workout I'm going to do is going to be hard. You can't do that either. You can't shortcut it. And again, yes, the software that I work with and develop workouts for is called the Sufferfest, but it's not the Sufferfest 24/7 every time, all day. It's that purpose driven. And so there are times to do that, but there's also the times where you have to bring it back and go easier. And so keeping those truly easy aerobic days, do not get thrown out. That's not junk. That's not wasted time. That is beneficial, necessary time. And I guess probably the other thing that's really often an issue is throwing away those things like strength training. Seeing it's like, well, it's not the sport or the activity that I want to do specifically, and so I'm not going to do that because it doesn't matter. But then the potential for injury goes up. Your performance, actually, you're leaving something on the table. And 40 years from now, your body might be saying, hey, if you had done some strength training 40 years ago, you'd be in better shape right now. And so, your future self will thank you for keeping that in the mix.
Yeah, awesome. I think it's really important to underscore that not going too hard too often, right? Because then you're just because then you get to that straight line where you're not progressing.
Yeah.
That's the
and what often happens too is then when you're supposed to go hard, you can't go as hard because you carry this residual fatigue. So your top end comes down. And again, because you don't keep the easy enough, you go up here and everything kind of ends up in this moderate level of kind of hard all the time, but nothing that really stimulates a change.
I was going to say that. And that's, speaking to David's question is people going too hard too often, and then they're
less hard over time.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. In Boulder here, I call it Iron Mania. People that are just training for an Ironman and they try to want to do everything at an Ironman race pace, which is not killer hard, but it's hard. And if you just do that day in and day out, week in and week out, you just don't get the gain. So you have to have a signal and a stimulus for change. And so that comes not from moderate what you can already do. It comes from actually pushing that limit as well as then pulling back from it. Allow that growth. It's kind of like a car, to get, if you drive a manual, which I guess there's less than one.
What's that?
Yeah. If you're, at the top of one gear, you actually have to get off the gas, put in the clutch, that's your rest and recovery, shift the gear to then be able to get back on it and accelerate to the next level. That's training. Fair
enough. Another person asked a kind of related question. You mentioned it in answering David's question, and this is from somebody who's anonymous. They said, how might we encourage rest days in sports apps, right? Because they mentioned Zwift encourages beating your PR, Strava is all about KOMs and, your segments and how you do. So you get this kind of always trying to reach that next peak. Is there anything that the apps themselves could do to help us from ourselves, save us from ourselves?
Definitely. So if you think of what a lot of those things they're accumulating, they're assessing like the accumulated load and the work that's done, but not the change or adaptation and improvement. And so I think focusing on that change and improvement and some of those trends are going to be something that people need to pay attention more and build into things, as well as not just treating rest and recovery as like black box, like hopefully you do it. And, if not, there's no, you don't see it, there's no tracking of it, is integrating some of that 24/7 then into that stream of work and what's going on, and seeing rest, sleep quality, etc., being interlaced with then the work and the training and the output trends. So I think there's a lot of opportunity yet in putting those things together.
Yeah, it's funny from my own experience. It's like when I'm out riding or something and, you see somebody go by and your kind of instinct is like, oh, go grab their wheel and let's go work hard. But you always have to dial it back. Yeah. Do your own workout. If you're going easy, stay easy, right?
Definitely. So I with some of the really fast athletes that I've coached over time, going out on a recovery ride for them, it might be a moderate intensity for me. That's just the scalar difference. Right. If Taylor Finney can push, 450 watts for an hour and I can do 300, well, him going very easy. Yeah. Okay. Maybe he's at 200 watts. And for me, that's still like 2/3 of what I can sustain. So it's a moderate effort. And we go out and do that. And still there's like people passing us left and right because they're in some cases not focusing on what they were supposed to do, or they just had no purpose and they're just going and like, I'm going to go and see what my average speed is today and try to do the most I can. And it's like, well, that's really not helping you necessarily, because Taylor's really fast. He's right. Infinitely faster than you, I can tell you. Yeah. But for right now, he's definitely not going to show that because it doesn't matter. Like save it for when it matters and have a purpose to that. So
awesome.
Something to think about.
Yeah, totally. Another question here is, why are bike computers still successful when phones contain all the hardware necessary to achieve the same functionality?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm going to have to, I got my shirt on here. And so, we don't make phones. So I'm going to have to say it's very important that we keep a separate, a separate line item here for bike computers. But honestly, some of it, just thinking about it, you go out for a ride, like I will, check my phone at times or take pictures and have those kind of things that I use the phone, but I want to have just that data there going as I'm riding along. And I wouldn't want to necessarily have all that same feedback, whether it's a text message or an email and all those kind of things coming through on the phone as I was riding. I'd like to have that thing that is separate. And some days I'll ride and actually, believe it or not, leave my phone at home. Scary thought almost, to just go out and I have then just that computer and that basic information. I can put basic screens on it. Like if I ride on a velodrome, I'm not, in many cases, even looking at the computer. We often in track cycling, you actually aren't allowed in competition to look at a computer in any way. It can be mounted under the saddle and the data can be collected, but you cannot look at it when you race on a velodrome in track cycling. So it gets that connection of like the feel of what you're doing back into what you're doing. And so I guess with the phone, yes, you can keep it in your back pocket and not look at it, but still, I think, just having those different tools, depending on your purpose. But I know some folks that are, that do use their phone. So it is out there. I still think that some people just like that choice of being able to do this or that and have that simplicity in the cycling computer in some way.
Fair enough.
Purpose built just for that.
Question from Andrew. What role do you think companies like Wahoo Fitness should play in increasing representation or otherwise promoting racial and ethnic diversity in cycling?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's actually really something that's pretty close to my heart in a lot of ways. I this past summer called a friend of mine, Marcus Robinson, in June just to check in with him. And he's a guy that I met through cycling. He actually works out at the Denver International Airport. And when I was flying to the 2008 Olympic Games, I was traveling with 3 bicycles, 2 of Taylor's Olympic bikes, and my bags and stuff for 8 months on the road. And Marcus kind of VIP services helped me out through the airport and get on and get ready with things. But I checked in with him because he's African-American, he is Black. And I was just checking in, like, how are you doing, Marcus? And he said, not good. I don't feel comfortable riding outside right now. And that to me just crushed me because we're still in the midst of the pandemic. And to think that like the weather's nice, he didn't have that freedom to go outside. His wife is a nurse and she didn't feel comfortable running outside. So they bought a treadmill in the middle of June to run inside for her to feel safe. And he's riding the trainer where like, I didn't feel any, issues in being able to go out and have that freedom. So we started a group called Ride for Racial Justice. And, we held a couple rides, several rides over the summer here in Colorado in different places. But one thing we did is we got in contact with an event, Steamboat Gravel, and basically the race promoter, race director there said, we're going to set aside 25 spots for athletes of color. And we have a program that we're supporting them actually through Wahoo. We have, they all have a Wahoo Roam computer, ticker, heart rate monitor. I've developed training plans for them within the Sufferfest app. We have a couple other companies that have come on board and are assisting in that. And so there are a number of other initiatives like that Wahoo is involved in. There's the Barings Bike Shop in Atlanta that does a lot of work with teaching kids. Basically, they earn a bike by doing different community service, learn how to work on them, fix them, and they have that ability to scale up. And we're working on different things of opening up doors and internships within the industry, within the cycling endurance sports industry for individuals that are coming from diverse backgrounds. And so I think it's just about doing the right thing. And I'm really happy with Wahoo being a part of that and helping, participate in that conversation, drive things forward, and even just representation in terms of what we see in terms of teams, athletes, advertising, all of those things are part of it. And expanding and improving that the reach and opportunity, opening doors. So I think there's a lot of opportunity for other companies to be doing that as well. It's a benefit for everyone.
Yeah, well, thanks for your answer and thanks for giving some details there. And Andrew, very good question. Thanks for asking that one. Let's move on to another one, and I am mindful of time, so we have a couple more minutes, right? Is that right, Neal?
Yep.
Awesome. Here's one from Ben. He said, what bikes do you ride? Road, mountain, gravel, and what do you enjoy most and why? So there you go.
All the bikes. So the equation that should be well known is the correct number of bikes to own is N+1. N being the current number of bikes you have, +1 is always where it's at. So I do ride a bit of everything. So I have gravel. I have track bikes, both for on the velodrome as well as like a fixed gear with brakes for out on the road for doing some training that way. I have a road bike, like an aero road bike and a climbing road bike. I have a travel bike, a Ritchie travel bike, so that I don't get charged airline fees and can travel and put it in a small rental car and be able to travel and ride my bike when I go different places. I've got a fat bike because I've done the Fat Bike World Championships out in Crested Butte. 5 times in a
Nice.
row, and we get snow here in Colorado, and the fat bike's sometimes the only way to get around. Have a trail bike that has more suspension, go out to Moab and have some awesome fun out there on the trails. Have a cross country mountain bike for racing. I'm doing the Leadville 100 this year.
Whoa.
Have a couple different commuter bikes. Have a belt drive commuter bike that's nice, so I don't mess up my pants when I'm wearing long pants riding to work. Has fenders, bell, all that. I think all bikes are good bikes.
Did you say you're doing Leadville 100? That's
yes.
incredible. Maybe you could explain that to the audience if they're not familiar with that one.
So Leadville 100 is 100-mile mountain bike race. Actually, it's about 103 miles is actually how long the course is, 103 miles. And Leadville itself is at 10,000 feet. That's the lowest elevation. That's the start and finish. And it goes up into the mountains. The high point is almost at 13,000 feet. Has a total of about 10,000 feet of climbing over those 100 miles on roads and trails out here in Colorado. It's August 14th, I believe, this year. And the crazy thing is I'm actually doing something called Lead Boat, which is Leadville on Saturday. And then on Sunday, there's the Steamboat Gravel Race. And I'm doing the 144-mile black course at Steamboat Springs the day after the Leadville 100. They selected 25 men and 25 women last year to do it, which we had, we got a year reprieve. So fortunately, I got an extra year to train for it. But yeah, so I'll be doing the Leadville 100 on Saturday, 14th, and then 144 miles on gravel in Steamboat Springs on Sunday, which is really stupid.
You said it, not me. I think it's amazing, but oh my goodness, that's wild. Maybe we could take one more question and then we can wrap it up from there. Let's see. We have a few here. We have one about altitudes, which is a good one. What primary training modifications would you suggest for an athlete training at altitude, say over 5,000 feet, as opposed closer to sea level?
Yeah, so I've been out here in Colorado for 24 years now. I grew up in Pennsylvania home. I'm born and raised at low elevation and lived for 20 some years there. But there's a couple things. So your work to rest ratios on your higher intensity days have to be different than what you do at sea level. So a 1-to-1 ratio at sea level is probably okay for a lot of those, like say above threshold efforts. We usually start off at double that as a starting point for intervals, and then get down to maybe 1.5 times the normal work to rest ratio that you would use at sea level. The other thing that we do for altitude here, number one, is to actually just reduce the pace or power output for that target relative to what you've done at sea level. So if somebody is at sea level and they run like a 7-minute mile pace at what is like a kind of a threshold or hard effort, up here, that's probably closer to about a 7:15 or even a 7:20 per mile pace. You have to basically slow that down. The best way to then to get that, what that offset is, to look at your heart rate and perceived effort. So again, easy, moderate, hard is still easy, moderate, hard at altitude. It's just a difference in how fast you go, or the power that you produce might be a little bit less. On a bike, you may actually find that you actually go faster at that same effort level, even with less power, because it's actually the aerodynamic resistance and the air density at altitude here is significantly reduced. It's the air density that's the real factor in that. And so that's the barometric pressure, which is the absolute uncorrected pressure, and then the temperature and the humidity. So those things in combination, but using that combination of your perceived effort and your heart rate still is not going to be dramatically different. For the same effort, your heart rate would be higher, like the same absolute output, but to go easy should be the same heart rate. And so that just might mean that you run a little slower, or your power is a little lower.
It's interesting. In my experience, it's the swim. So I'm a swim bike runner, as you could tell from my hat. The swim at altitude seems so much harder to me, and that's what I've noticed over time. But I'm sure we could drill into that, and I would love to. But I want to give us a chance to wrap up. So you have something coming up this week on the Sufferfest app that I know you want to let people know about. So what's happening?
Yeah, so starting on Sunday, we have a 7-day tour of Sufferlandria. It is 7 days of cycling sessions. each day. And some of those days even have 2 sessions. So it is a bit of an overload. This is a planned overload, but it is a fundraiser for the Davis Phinney Foundation. And so we've raised over $1 million over the past couple of years with this. This year, our target is $250,000. I think we're getting close to around $200,000 on that for donations for people to basically enter and ride that Tour Suffer Landry. You can ride it as easy or even just do parts of it, but the whole thing, it is available in the app. If you use, download the Sufferfest app. Actually, we have a code that you can use. It's just Kickstart 60 to get 60 days, so 2 months of access to the Sufferfest for free. So that'll carry you through the Tour Suffer Landry and some recovery after, and then you can do some yoga and other things, strength training if you need some of those things. But it really is one of those things that this is part of what we do at the Sufferfest and Wahoo, of being able to help others. And the Davis Phinney Foundation is named for
Awesome.
Davis Phinney, who has early onset Parkinson's disease. And so the Davis Phinney Foundation is about helping individuals live well. And so that's something out there, give you an opportunity for a little bit of a challenge.
Awesome. And I'm going to do a plug as well. The Google Bike team hosts a weekly ride on Wednesday, so later this afternoon at 4:45 p.m. on Zwift. It's a 45-minute social ride, and come on out and join us on the Zwift app, and we'll do some riding, some talking, and have some fun. So with that, I think we're going to wrap it up. Neal, it's been a great pleasure. I mean, I could sit here and chat forever, and we didn't get to all the questions. There were a lot of questions, which means you may have to come back sometime and do some follow-up. If you wouldn't mind, we'd love to have you back.
Definitely. And we could go more in the triathlon realm if you wanted to add the swim and the bike, or swim and the run a little bit more.
Well, I would like that, but I don't know, I don't know about everybody else. But let's throw up on the screen right now some ways to connect with Neal and the Wahoo team through social media. If you didn't get a question asked, you can, and it's burning and you really want to get it over to Neal, you can, reach out to me or to the bike programs team at Google, and we can, get that over to Neal and hopefully get an answer for you. So again, Neal, thanks so much. This has been a blast. Really enjoyed it. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, Dan. Thanks, everyone.
All right. Bye-bye.